Organizations rarely abandon their mission intentionally. They drift from it gradually. Hey, welcome to the Unfinished Leadership Podcast. My name is John. Today is episode 11. Something that so many leaders are familiar with is something called mission drift. Mission drift is a very real thing. And what I want to talk about today is what happens before mission drift. There's been a lot written on mission drift. There's a great book on mission drift, Peter Greer, and he talks about mission drift, so important. But here's what I know. Before the plane crashes, the pilot fell asleep. I want to talk about leader drift. And specifically what I want to go after are 4 things that cause leaders to drift. Unprocessed pain, the undisciplined pursuit of more, hubris born of success, and 4th, we're going to talk about isolation in the ivory tower. Let's first talk about unprocessed pain. It's true that pain is either transformed or it's transmitted. One of the things that causes leaders to drift, that then will eventually cause an organization to drift, is unprocessed pain in the life of a leader. Life is hard. Leading in life, super hard. I did an episode a number of months ago on leadership pain. If you didn't listen to that, I encourage you to check it out. And it's just true. Great book called Leadership Pain. Your capacity for influence is connected to your capacity to handle pain. And yet, here's what I know. Many leaders, many of you watching this podcast right now on YouTube or listening to it as you drive to work or as you're working out at the gym, you've been hurt. You've been wounded. You've been betrayed. Your character has been maligned. You are in pain. And I remember that movie Braveheart, one of my favorite movies of all time. If you guys remember this movie, where one of the characters in it, one of Mel Gibson's buddies, he got shot with an arrow. It was one of his buddy's dads. And I remember when that guy got shot with an arrow, what that guy did, such a legend, instead of saying, all right, I'm done, he broke the arrow off and he kept on going. That's how many leaders lead. That if we could understand right now, man, they've got all kinds of arrows that have been broken off over the years, and they just keep on leading. Well, here's the problem. That wound gets infected. The problem is, yes, you've continued to lead forward, but the truth is you have unprocessed pain. One of the most important things that leaders can do, if you don't want yourself and then your organization to drift, is to get help, is to process your pain with someone that you can trust. It's one of my favorite things to encourage leaders to do. It's because leaders don't want to do it. But I say, hey, get in a cohort, get in a room, a mastermind, whether it's a C12 group or Vistage. I lead a similar group to this myself with Unfinished. Get in a circle, a container of other trusted leaders where you can be vulnerable, where you can talk about the unprocessed pain in your life. You can talk about the war wounds. You can talk about the arrows that have been broken off, and yet you still got to lead, man. You don't get to just take a month off. You don't get to just say, I'm hurting. I'm not going to work for a year. No, those of us in the chairs that we sit in, we don't get that option. So we keep leading. But the question is, has that wound gotten infected? And we're talking today about leader drift, because leader drift will lead to mission drift. And mission drift, well, that's going to lead to an organization that no longer exists. This is why people under the age of 30 have no idea when we say, wow, that's a Kodak moment. They look back at us like, who's Kodak? Mission drift, right? This is also why you can't remember the last time you went to Blockbuster. No, it doesn't exist anymore. Well, back that whole thing up. What is it? Mission drift. Well, what happened before that? Answer, leader drift. What causes leaders to drift? Unprocessed pain. Get in a room where people can help you process your pain. Get counseling. I recommend Christian therapy. I recommend getting with a trained professional that can help clean out that wound so that you can experience healing. Pain is either transmitted or transformed. I highly recommend that you would experience your pain transformed. What else causes leader drift? Let's secondly talk about the undisciplined pursuit of more. What a phrase. And that's not me just making that phrase up. That phrase comes from a book that I want to recommend titled How the Mighty Fall. What a great book by Jim Collins. incredible book where he studies different organizations that were once mighty, that were once incredible, and they no longer exist. They have absolutely hit the tarmac, over. Why? Well, when you back it up, he said one of the 5 reasons why the mighty have fallen is what I'm talking about right now, called the undisciplined pursuit of more. Let me be clear. More isn't the problem. Your undisciplined pursuit of more, no, that's the problem. And this is what's really difficult, right? Now you've got budget. Now you've got more options. When you started it, and I'm a founder as well, bootstrapping this whole thing, we've been leading for 14 years, started Mission Church in my house, had no budget. I remember when we didn't have computers, we didn't have printers. It was me in my house. Tommy hadn't even moved back to Chicago yet. It was just me. Having meetings with myself, like, all right, man, we didn't have any options. But now you've grown a little bit, haven't you? Now you've scaled. Now you've got budget. Now you've got options. And what I've found that takes so many leaders off course, that causes leader drift, is the undisciplined pursuit of more. So what do? Well, we need to weigh our more against our mission. Whenever you're thinking about that more, weigh it against your mission. Weigh it against your values. Weigh it against the vision of your organization. More isn't the problem. We need more. We need to keep going. We need to keep advancing. Absolutely. Don't misunderstand me. But what happens is when your more gets reckless, the problem is when your more gets reckless, the problem is when your pursuit of more isn't disciplined. This is what Jim Collins is talking about. So what do? We need to weigh our more. We need to run it through that filter, right? We take whatever it is we're wanting to go after, run it through that filter, mission, vision, values. This will really help prevent leader drift and then mission drift. The third thing that I want to talk about, so we're talking about unprocessed pain today. What causes leader drift? That. What else causes leader drift? The undisciplined pursuit of more. What else causes leader drift? Pride. The way that Jim Collins talks about it in this book, let me use one more of his 5. He talks about hubris born of success. What a great way to put it. I'll just call it pride, but hubris born of success. One of the most dangerous things is success. You and I are most vulnerable in seasons of success. You weren't as vulnerable when no one knew who you were. You weren't as vulnerable when your thing still wasn't off the ground yet, but now it is. And you're vulnerable. Success, it's not a bad thing. It just means that you and I are vulnerable to pride, hubris, to think that we are 6, 7, and bulletproof. And this happens to so many leaders. I could list a number of different leaders. I lead in the church space, have for 20 years. There's a number of names that come to my mind right now and perhaps come to your mind as well. CEOs that are very well known around the world, or senior pastors whose lives imploded and the organizations that they led. Why? Hubris born of success. They touched the glory. They began to take what I would call the bait of Satan, meaning they began to believe that they're the ones that did it. And so you and I, we need to fight against the hubris born of success. When success comes, let's celebrate that. Let's be really thankful for that. But let's make sure that we don't allow success to lead us to places that will eventually lead to our peril. In another book that Jim Collins has, he talks about how humble leaders are really the best of the best. And so this needs to be something that you and I think about quite often. Are we humble leaders? We're talking today about leader drift, because leader drift leads to mission drift, and mission drift will lead to the end of whatever it is that you love and are leading with all your heart. We're talking about unprocessed pain. Secondly, we're talking about the undisciplined pursuit of more. Third, we're talking about hubris born of success. And the last one I want to talk about is isolation in the ivory tower. Now, the problem isn't the ivory tower. If you're leading, and there's different stages of leadership, you start by leading among, then you move towards leading out front, and then eventually you move to leading above. And that, I remember hearing that from a leadership talk many years ago from T.D. Jakes, talking about the different stages of leadership. I never forgot that. And he tracked along the leadership of Moses. Maybe you've heard of Moses before. And he had a pretty big pretty big job. He was leading a couple million people. Not sure how big the organization yours is that you lead, but those are the 3 stages. And so what I found is this: if you're in the startup stage, and I love encouraging other entrepreneurs and startup pastors or startup business leaders, yeah, you're going to need to be with, for sure, like very much so, all the time. Well, a day is coming where you're going to need elevation. A day is coming where you better gain altitude, where you're no longer just working in, but now you're working on. And the only way you can work on is if you can see beyond. I want you to think about what I just said. So important. One of the reasons that you're stuck right now, perhaps, is because you haven't made these adjustments. So the problem isn't the ivory tower. What is an ivory tower? It's something that gives me altitude. It's something that gives me elevation. Because a leader of leaders that's leading something at scale better be able to see. They need to be able to see beyond, and so they better get some elevation. The issue isn't the ivory tower. The issue is what oftentimes happens in the ivory tower. The ivory tower, and you know this, oftentimes leads to isolation. They've said it before. I don't know who originally came up with this, but leadership is lonely at the top. That's true. But here's what I also know: it doesn't have to be as lonely as you're choosing to make it. It really doesn't. You can actually adjust. You can shift. You can invite some friends into the ivory tower. Better yet, work in the ivory tower, but please take breaks and get out of the ivory tower. Go hang out with your people, have dinners, have lunches, have breakfast, spend time with friends, spend time with people that don't have to do what you ask them to do. And this is what I've seen in so many leaders: is they are moving so fast. They have so many demands on their life, and I have so many demands on my life. And if we're not careful, we not only work in the ivory tower, we live in the ivory tower. That leads to isolation. Eventually, that will lead to you losing touch with the people that you lead. But it leads to this kind of life where we're lonely. And that is a painful kind of situation. Leadership is lonely at the top, but it definitely doesn't have to be as lonely as you're choosing to make it. Now, when you think about these 4 things, one of the greatest leaders who's ever led is a guy by the name of David. You can read of him in the Old Testament, King David. He had a huge job. And it's true. This guy ended up crashing and burning. When did he crash and burn? He crashed and burned because of this fourth theme that I'm talking about today, is because of the ivory tower. He decided to just send his men to keep on fighting, and he stopped fighting. He took himself off of the front lines. That was a mistake. And he not only was in the ivory tower, but he lived in the ivory tower to the point where he ended up crashing and burning. What I'm talking about today is leader drift. No one does this on purpose. It happens gradually. It happens subtly. And what you and I need to know, what you and I need to be equipped with, are these 4 things. There's many other things that cause leader drift, but I can promise you these 4 things are at the top of the list. And so that's all I have today for this episode. I keep these as short as I can so that you guys can knock these out on your way to or from work. And it's just been such a joy to start this Unfinished Leadership podcast. I'm a fellow leader with you guys in the trenches of leadership, truly trying to learn and trying to figure it out myself. And so as I'm learning, I love to share. The resource I share with you this month, How the Mighty Fall, a couple more. Anti-Burnout by my friend Alan Briggs. There's a number of leaders, because of the 4 things I just shared, are absolutely burnt out. Check out Alan's work. He's an amazing coach. If you need a coach, I'd recommend Alan. And then lastly, How Leaders Lose Their Way by Peter Greer. Great book. This is one that I just came across a couple weeks ago. That's all I have for today's episode. Hey, if you guys would, it'd mean a lot to me personally. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button, share this with a friend. If you're on Spotify or Apple, you could leave a review. This is a brand new podcast. It takes a number of years for podcasts to get out there, but my heart is to serve leaders. What fulfills me deeply is when I can add value to leaders. And I believe it. Grace is a gift, but growth is a choice. And together in this unfinished leadership community, you and I, we are choosing growth. So no more drifting. Let's be intentional about this. Let's be leaders that are aware, conscious of the different threats that are coming at us day in and day out. We'll see you guys next month. This is the Unfinished Leadership Podcast.